Gabriel Nark adjusted his Italian silk tie, his eyes drawn to the rain streaking the windows of the Palazzo, the finest restaurant in Millbrook. The droplets on the glass formed patterns that reminded him of tears he had shed countless times since Flora, his beloved wife, had disappeared 25 years ago. Inside the restaurant, the warm glow of amber lights reflected off crystal glasses, creating a cozy contrast to the storm raging outside. The dining room was mostly empty that Tuesday evening, and Gabriel sat at his usual table near the stone fireplace. At 55, he was a man of immense wealth, having built a tech empire, but no fortune could fill the void Flora's absence had left. She had vanished without a trace during a business trip, 5 months pregnant. Despite exhaustive searches, no answers ever came, leaving Gabriel with nothing but memories and pain. As he absent-mindedly browsed the leather menu, something, or rather someone, caught his attention. A young waitress moved gracefully across the room, and Gabriel froze. His heart raced, his mind briefly doubting reality. The resemblance was uncanny, her honey-colored eyes, delicate smile, even her elegant, almost floating walk mirrored Flora's. With trembling hands, Gabriel let the menu slip onto the table, the sound catching the attention of Mark, the maitre d', who had known him for years. "Is everything all right, Mr. Nark?" Mark asked, concerned. Barely able to speak, Gabriel nodded toward the waitress. "Who is that?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Mark followed his gaze and smiled. "That's Sandra. She started a few months ago. Excellent employee, dedicated and hard-working. She came from New York looking for a fresh start." Gabriel's mind spun. Sandra, the name he and Flora had chosen for their unborn daughter. Could it be possible? The resemblance, her apparent age, it all aligned too perfectly. His heart pounded as a surge of emotions consumed him. Gathering courage, Gabriel asked Mark to call her over. As he waited, his restless fingers toyed with the wedding ring he had never removed. Sandra approached with a polite smile, unaware of the storm she had stirred within him. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you with anything?" she asked, her voice carrying the same gentle sweetness Gabriel remembered in Flora. He took a moment to compose himself. "Please sit down for a moment," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Seeing her hesitation, he added, "I promise I won't take much of your time." Sandra glanced at Mark, who gave a reassuring nod. She sat, adjusting her apron with gestures that sent vivid flashbacks of Flora surging through Gabriel's mind. As they talked, Gabriel learned that Sandra had grown up in an orphanage in New York, never knowing her biological parents. At 18, she had decided to carve her own path, and had chosen Millbrook by chance after falling in love with the town during a weekend trip. Every word she spoke felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Gabriel listened intently, suppressing the urge to share his suspicions. He didn't want to overwhelm her with hasty revelations. Then an idea struck him. Gabriel made her an unexpected offer, a job as his personal assistant, with a salary 3 times her current pay and full benefits. Startled, Sandra regarded him with a mix of suspicion and intrigue. "Why me? You barely know me," she asked, her sharpness echoing Flora's once fiery wit. Gabriel smiled gently. "Sometimes we have to trust our instincts. You give me confidence, Sandra. I promise you won't regret it." The rain continued to pour outside, but inside the palazzo, a story of destiny, second chances, and long-buried secrets was unfolding. Sandra promised to think about the offer, unaware that this conversation would change her life forever. As Gabriel watched her return to her duties, his mind was already racing with plans. He needed to confirm his suspicions, but carefully. If Sandra truly was his daughter this time, he wouldn't let fate steal her away. A week later, Sandra stood in the imposing lobby of the Nark building in downtown Millbrook. The towering glass and steel structure reflected the morning sunlight, creating a dazzling interplay of colors that did little to calm her nerves. After much deliberation, she had decided to accept Gabriel's offer, though a part of her still questioned the uncanny coincidence of the opportunity. The sound of her new heels clicking against the marble floor echoed as she approached the reception desk. She had invested a portion of her savings in a professional wardrobe to match the role's demands. A poised receptionist named Sarah greeted her and escorted her to the executive elevator. "Mr. Nark is waiting for you on the 25th floor," Sarah said warmly. As Sandra stepped into the elevator, the doors closed behind her, and she couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Little did she know, the decision to accept Gabriel's offer would set into motion events that would unravel the truth about her past, and forever change both their lives. Sarah greeted Sandra with a professional smile as the elevator began its ascent. He rarely hires people directly, you know. You must be really special. Those words only heightened Sandra's uneasiness. She glanced at her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls, a 25-year-old woman trying to appear older and more confident than she felt. Her long brown hair was neatly tied in a modest bun, and her navy blue suit was a safe choice for her first day. When the elevator doors opened directly into Gabriel's office, Sandra was momentarily struck by the sophistication of the space. The panoramic view of Millbrook's rolling hills stretched across the room, its elegance tempered by a warmth that made the space feel personal. Gabriel stood by the window, gazing at the landscape, but turned as she entered. His smile was warm, strangely familiar. "Welcome, Sandra," he said, gesturing to one of the plush leather armchairs. "I hope you'll feel at home here." Over the next few hours, Gabriel introduced her to her new role. She would organize his schedule, assist in high-level meetings, and help manage the company's social initiatives. The responsibilities were challenging, but Sandra's determination made her eager to prove herself. "There's something special I want to show you," Gabriel said after their discussion. He led her to a side door and opened it, revealing a smaller yet equally elegant office. "This will be your space," he said. The room was outfitted with a polished mahogany desk, a state-of-the-art computer, and to Sandra's surprise, a small vertical garden filled with orchids. "Orchids were my wife's favorite flowers," Gabriel explained, his voice soft and tinged with nostalgia. "She always said they were like people. They need care and patience to bloom." Sandra felt a strange connection to his words, as if a distant memory was stirring within her. "They're beautiful," she murmured, stepping closer to the flowers. "I've always had a special connection with orchids. Even at the orphanage, I could make them bloom when no one else could." Gabriel watched her intently, his eyes lingering on the small birthmark behind her ear, identical to Flora's. His heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. He needed patience, just as Flora had taught him with the orchids. Throughout the day, Gabriel shared stories about the company and his life. He spoke of his humble beginnings and ambitious future projects. But when he mentioned Flora, Sandra seemed to listen more closely, her interest almost involuntary. During lunch, which they shared in Gabriel's office, Sandra began to open up. She spoke about her childhood in the orphanage, the struggles, and her dreams. "I always wondered what my parents were like," she admitted, idly toying with her food. "The other kids made up fantastic stories about their families, but I always felt the truth about mine was out there, waiting to be found." Gabriel swallowed hard, fighting the urge to reveal his suspicions. Instead, he gently asked, "Did you ever find any documents about your origins?" "Just the basics," Sandra replied. "I was left at the orphanage as a baby, wrapped in a blue blanket with the initials IT embroidered on it. I've always wondered what they meant." The mention of the initials sent a jolt through Gabriel. The blanket she described had been a gift he had given Flora when they discovered her pregnancy. But he needed more proof before sharing his suspicions. By the end of the day, Sandra appeared more at ease. Gabriel watched as she meticulously arranged her desk, her movements reminiscent of Flora's perfectionism. It was as though past and present were converging before his eyes. "Tomorrow, we'll dive into the major projects," he said, signaling the close of the workday. "There's a lot to accomplish, but something tells me we'll make a great team." Sandra smiled, a smile that mirrored Flora's in a way that made Gabriel's heart ache. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Nark. I promise I won't let you down." As she left, Gabriel picked up the phone. "I need your help with a discreet investigation," he told his trusted lawyer. "It's about the St. Clair Orphanage in New York. I need all admission records for babies from January to December 2003. The search for the truth had begun, and Gabriel knew that every moment spent with Sandra would bring him closer to answers. Fate had handed him a second chance, and this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. Autumn painted Millbrook's streets in shades of gold as Sandra marked her first month at the company. The transition had felt surprisingly natural, as though this path had always been meant for her. While organizing files in her office one afternoon, she came across an old photograph that had slipped out of a folder. The time-worn image showed a young, elegant woman seated on a garden bench surrounded by orchids. Her smile was mesmerizing, hypnotic in a way that sent chills down Sandra's spine. Turning the photo over, Sandra read the inscription, "Flora, Orchid Garden." A wave of unease and familiarity washed over her. Who is this woman, and why did her smile feel so hauntingly familiar? "I see you've found one of my favorite photos," Gabriel's voice startled Sandra. He stood at the doorway, watching her with an enigmatic expression. "This is Flora, my wife." The photo was taken a few months before she disappeared. Sandra couldn't tear her eyes away from the image. "She was very beautiful," she murmured, feeling an inexplicable connection to the photograph. "And these orchids, are they the same species we have here in the office?" Gabriel stepped closer, his gaze filled with contained emotion. "Yes. She created this garden. Flora had a special gift with orchids, just like you." He paused, as if carefully weighing his next words. "You know, Sandra, sometimes fate has mysterious ways of bringing people together." Their moment was interrupted by Sarah, who entered hurriedly with an envelope in hand. "Mr. Nark, the documents you requested have arrived." Gabriel took the envelope with a nod, but for the rest of the afternoon, Sandra found it difficult to focus. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Flora's photograph. There was something hauntingly familiar in her eyes and her smile, stirring strange sensations, like memories buried deep within her struggling to surface. At the end of the workday, Gabriel called Sandra into his office. The setting sun bathed the room in hues of pink and orange, casting a magical glow through the panoramic windows. "Sandra," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I'd like to share a story with you. It's about Flora and what really happened 25 years ago." He recounted how he had met Flora in business school, their joyful marriage, and the dreams they had shared. He described the happiness they felt when Flora became pregnant and the plans they had made for their future together. But then his tone darkened as he spoke of family tensions, especially with Kingsley, Flora's brother, who had always disapproved of their union. "Flora was 5 months pregnant when she disappeared," Gabriel continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She was supposed to be on a routine business trip, but she never returned. The investigations led nowhere, as if she had vanished into thin air." Sandra listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. Something about his story resonated deeply, as though each word was unlocking a part of her she hadn't known existed. "Mr. Nark," she asked hesitantly, "why are you telling me this?" Gabriel rose from his chair, retrieving the envelope Sarah had brought earlier. "Because I found something, records from the orphanage where you grew up." He pulled out several documents. In December 2003, a baby was left there, wrapped in a blanket embroidered with the initials, IT. The date coincides exactly with when my daughter should have been born. The air in the office felt heavier as Sandra took the documents from his outstretched hand. Her fingers trembled as she scanned them. Among the papers was a photo of the blue blanket she had cherished her entire life, the only memento of her origins. "And there's more," Gabriel said, his voice now a near whisper. He pulled out an old, yellowed letter. "I found this among Flora's belongings. It's a letter she wrote just days before she disappeared. She expressed concern about Kingsley, about some suspicious behavior of his." Sandra read the documents in silence as tears welled in her eyes. The coincidences were overwhelming. The dates, the initials, her inexplicable connection with orchids, and the physical resemblance to Flora that others in the office had already commented on. "You think I'm—" Sandra's voice faltered, unable to finish the sentence. Gabriel stepped closer, his own eyes brimming with emotion. "I believe you're my daughter, Sandra. The daughter I thought I lost 25 years ago. But this isn't just about confirming my suspicions. It's about understanding a mystery that changed both our lives." A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the quickened heartbeats of two souls who might have always been destined to reunite. The truth was beginning to surface, but Gabriel and Sandra both knew there were still many unanswered questions, and that not all revelations would be easy to accept. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the emotional storm within Sandra. She had spent the night sleepless, replaying her conversation with Gabriel over and over in her mind. In her small rented apartment, she sat with Flora's photograph, which Gabriel had allowed her to take home, examining every detail as if it held the answers she sought. Sandra opened the old box that held the few belongings she had kept from the orphanage. Her fingers grazed the blue blanket with the embroidered initials IT, now faded by time. The blanket seemed to whisper a different story in light of recent revelations. She traced the delicate stitching as fragmented memories of her childhood flickered in her mind like distant shadows. The sudden ringing of the phone broke her reverie. It was Gabriel, his voice carrying a mix of nervous anticipation and hope. "Sandra, I know this is a lot to process," he began, his tone careful but earnest. "But there's something important I'd like to show you. Can I pick you up in an hour?" An hour later, they sat in silence during the drive, the quiet between them oddly comforting. It felt as though an unspoken bond was already forming. Gabriel guided the car through Millbrook's winding streets until they reached a stately colonial-style house, surrounded by a vibrant, meticulously kept garden. "This is where Flora and I lived," he said softly as he parked. "I've kept everything as it was, hoping that one day I could share it with our daughter." Sandra stepped inside, and an inexplicable sense of familiarity washed over her. The soft fragrance of orchids wafted through the air, emanating from a winter garden in the living room. The walls bore photographs chronicling the love story of Gabriel and Flora, each image a testament to a life filled with promise and heartbreak. Gabriel led her upstairs and opened a door to a nursery. "This was the room we prepared for you," he said, his voice filled with quiet emotion. The room remained untouched. Painted in gentle shades of green, it housed an intricately carved wooden crib at its center. On the shelves, children's books and plush teddy bears stood as silent witnesses to a dream that had never been realized. Sandra's gaze fell on an antique dresser adorned with a music box. She opened it, and a delicate melody filled the air. Tears pricked her eyes as she murmured, "This song. I know it. I've always heard it in my dreams, but never knew where it came from." Gabriel leaned against the doorframe, visibly moved. "Flora played this every night," he said, his voice faltering. "She believed you could already recognize it. She called it our special song." They continued to explore the house as Gabriel shared stories about Flora, her love for classical literature, her talent for painting, and her dream of establishing a foundation to help underprivileged children. With every word, Sandra felt like pieces of a long-lost puzzle were finally falling into place. In the library, Gabriel retrieved a photo album from a shelf and turned to a particular image. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a picture of young Flora. "You have the same birthmark she did, right behind your left ear." Startled, Sandra instinctively touched the crescent-shaped mark she had always considered unique. The weight of the coincidences pressed on her as they transformed into undeniable connections. "There's something else I want you to see," Gabriel said, moving to a hidden safe embedded in the wall. From it, he retrieved an old diary. "This belonged to Flora," he explained. "I recently found it hidden among some books." She wrote about her suspicions regarding Kingsley, her brother, and his manipulation of company documents. She feared for her safety, but wanted to protect her growing family. Sandra flipped through the diary's pages, uncovering a portrait of Flora vastly different from the serene woman in the photographs. The entries revealed a woman burdened by worry, trying desperately to shield her loved ones from harm. Gabriel pointed to the final entry, his voice tight with emotion. In her last note, Flora mentioned a meeting with Kingsley in New York. She intended to confront him with the evidence she had uncovered. That was the last time anyone saw her. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within. Sandra closed the diary, feeling the heavy weight of the story that had been handed down to her. "What happened to Kingsley?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He became vice president of the company after Flora disappeared," Gabriel replied, his eyes gleaming with determination. "He built a reputation as a respectable businessman, but I've always sensed something darker beneath the surface. Now, with you here, the pieces are finally starting to come together." Rain began to fall, its rhythm tapping softly against the library windows. Sandra gazed at her reflection in the glass. For the first time, she saw more than her own features. She saw Flora. She saw Gabriel. She saw the unmistakable threads of a heritage that even time couldn't erase. "What do we do now?" Sandra asked, turning to Gabriel. "First," he replied, "we need to be absolutely sure. Tomorrow we'll do a DNA test. After that, we need to uncover the whole truth, not just for us, but for Flora." The storm outside raged with increasing intensity, but within the library's walls, father and daughter began to build a fragile bridge over the 25-year abyss that had separated them. Every revelation was a step toward a greater truth, one that could finally bring justice and healing to wounds long left open. The following Monday morning, Sandra and Gabriel sat in a private room at Millbrook's most renowned clinical analysis laboratory, awaiting the DNA test results. The room was quiet, weighted with expectation. On the mahogany table between them rested a sealed envelope that held the answer they had been waiting for. "Are you sure you want to open it now?" Gabriel asked, his hands resting near the envelope. Sandra nodded, her heart pounding so hard it felt as though it might burst from her chest. The results were unequivocal, a 99.99% probability of paternity. That number transformed doubts into certainties and suspicions into facts. Sandra was, without question, the daughter of Gabriel and Flora Nark. Silent tears streamed down both their faces as they absorbed the scientific confirmation of what their hearts had already told them. Gabriel reached across the table and gently took Sandra's hand. "I always knew this day would come," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the first moment I saw you in that restaurant, something inside me recognized you." Back at the office, father and daughter began discussing their next steps. The truth of their kinship was just the beginning. Unanswered questions still loomed about Flora's disappearance and Kingsley's role in the events of 25 years ago. "We need to be cautious," Gabriel warned as he closed the blinds in his office. "Kingsley is a powerful and influential man. If he finds out we're digging into the past, he may try to stop us." Sandra was poring over her mother's diary, searching for clues in the decades-old entries. Suddenly, she pointed to a specific passage. "Here," she said. "Mom mentions a folder with important documents that she kept in a safe place. She wrote about a safe at a bank branch." Gabriel's eyes widened as a long-buried memory surfaced. "The central bank," he said. "Flora had a safe there. I never accessed it because it was in her name, but now, as her legal heir, you can." Sandra nodded, understanding the plan. In the days that followed, they worked discreetly to gather the necessary documentation. The DNA test results, Sandra's birth records from the orphanage, and Flora's diary formed a compelling dossier that left no doubt about Sandra's identity. With the help of Gabriel's top lawyers, they began the legal process for recognition of paternity. The news spread quickly through the company, sparking whispers and speculation. Kingsley, who had been away on business, returned in haste. He stormed into Gabriel's office, his usual composure slipping. "What is this nonsense I'm hearing?" Kingsley demanded, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "Have you lost your mind, Gabriel? After 25 years, you suddenly claim to have found your daughter?" Gabriel remained calm, his years of suspicion crystallizing into certainty in the face of Kingsley's overreaction. "It's not a claim, Kingsley. I have proof," Gabriel said evenly. "Sandra is Flora's and my daughter." Kingsley's face turned ashen. His eyes darted to the framed portrait of Flora on the wall, lingering there for a moment. "This is preposterous," he muttered, more to himself than to Gabriel. "You can't prove anything." "Oh, but I can," Gabriel countered, sliding a folder across the desk. "The DNA results, the orphanage records, and soon, we'll have access to Flora's safe at the bank." At the mention of the safe, Kingsley visibly staggered. He leaned against a chair, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Just then, Sandra entered the office. Kingsley turned toward her, his expression frozen as though he had seen a ghost. The resemblance to Flora, illuminated by the late afternoon light, was undeniable. "Uncle Kingsley," Sandra said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her, "I think it's time we talked." The tension in the room was palpable. Kingsley's gaze flickered between Sandra and Gabriel, like a cornered animal searching for escape. "This is absurd," he finally said, striding toward the door. "You don't know what you're getting into." After his stormy exit, Gabriel and Sandra exchanged significant looks. "His reaction says it all," Gabriel said. "He knows more than he's letting on." Sandra nodded, determination hardening her features. "Tomorrow we'll go to the bank," Gabriel said decisively. "Whatever Flora kept in that safe, it's what Kingsley fears most." Sandra agreed, sensing they were drawing closer to the truth that had eluded them for so long. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, revealing a picture that, though painful, needed to come to light. That night, while organizing her desk to leave, Sandra found an envelope that someone had slid under the door. Inside, there was a single photograph of Flora, pregnant and standing in front of an unknown house. On the back was a handwritten message: "Not all truths should be revealed." The morning was exceptionally cold when Gabriel and Sandra arrived at the central bank. The imposing building, with its classic architecture, seemed to guard not only material wealth, but also secrets long buried in time. The manager received them in his private office and carefully examined the documentation proving Sandra's identity as Flora's legitimate heir. After several calls and verifications, they were finally led to the safe area. "The safe hasn't been opened in 25 years, the manager explained, consulting the records. "According to our procedures, we perform annual maintenance, but the contents remain intact since the last time Mrs. Flora Nark was here." The metallic sound of the key turning in the lock echoed through the silent room. Sandra held Gabriel's hand firmly, both of them tense with anticipation of what they might find inside the safe. Inside, they found a brown leather folder, some yellowed envelopes, and a small jewelry box. Gabriel immediately recognized the folder. It was identical to the one Flora had mentioned in her diary. "Let's take everything to analyze in a more private place," Gabriel suggested, noticing the manager's excessive interest in the safe's contents. Back in Gabriel's office, father and daughter began to examine the documents. The folder contained contracts, bank records, and a series of notes made by Flora. The evidence pointed to an elaborate scheme of diverting company resources, orchestrated by Kingsley. "Look at this," Sandra said, showing a series of suspicious bank transfers. Kingsley was diverting money to overseas accounts even before Mom's disappearance. Gabriel examined the documents, his face hardening. Flora must have discovered the scheme. That's why she was so worried in the weeks before she disappeared. In the small jewelry box, they found something even more surprising: an old flash drive and a hastily written note from Flora. "To whoever finds this, the truth is in the files. Kingsley is not who he appears to be. If something happens to me, look in the country house in Hillsdale. The key is with the housekeeper, Maria." Sandra searched the name on the computer. "Maria Conroy still lives in Hillsdale. We can find her today." While they were organizing a discreet visit to the former housekeeper, they were surprised by a call from reception. Kingsley was coming up for an emergency board meeting. "He must have been informed about our visit to the bank," Gabriel concluded. "We need to act quickly." Sandra put the documents in her bag, preparing to leave discreetly. "I'll look for Maria while you deal with the board. The less Kingsley suspects of our movements, the better." Gabriel agreed, hugging his daughter tightly. "Be careful. Kingsley might be desperate now that we're close to the truth." As Sandra left the building through a side exit, Gabriel prepared to face his brother-in-law in the boardroom. 25 years of lies and manipulation were about to come to light, and he needed to play his cards wisely. In the elevator, Sandra clutched the flash drive in her hand, feeling that she was getting closer to discovering what really happened to her mother. The truth, however painful it might be, needed to be revealed. The day was just beginning, and the next few hours promised to uncover secrets that would forever change the destiny of the Nark family. The road to Hillsdale wound through the hills as Sandra drove with determination. Maria Conroy's address was scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper in her pocket, and each mile brought her closer to the answers she sought. Meanwhile, in his office, Gabriel faced a tense board meeting. Kingsley had called an extraordinary session, claiming concerns about the company's stability in light of the recent family events. "Gentlemen of the board," Kingsley began, his voice studiously controlled, "I am deeply concerned about our president's erratic behavior. This absurd story about a lost daughter is negatively affecting our business." Gabriel remained serene, observing the faces around the table. Some showed genuine concern, while others seemed more interested in the unfolding drama. "If you'll allow me," Gabriel responded, opening a folder on the table, "I'd like to share some information I recently discovered about the company's financial management over the last 25 years. Kingsley's face visibly paled. Meanwhile, Sandra arrived at a modest house on the outskirts of Hillsdale. Maria Conroy, a lady in her 70s, received her with wide eyes and surprise. "My goodness," she exclaimed, bringing her hands to her face. "It's like seeing Mrs. Flora again." Maria invited Sandra in, serving coffee while sharing memories of the past. "Your mother was a kind soul. In the last days before she left, she was very distressed. She always came here, kept documents in her old room. Does the country house still exist?" Sandra asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "It's been abandoned for years," Maria said, looking at Sandra. "No one ever claimed the property after your mother disappeared. She went to a kitchen drawer and retrieved an old key. Your mother made me promise to keep this. She said one day someone would come looking." Back in the boardroom, Gabriel was presenting the evidence of the financial irregularities he had discovered in the safe's documents. The board members listened in stunned silence as he detailed the diversion scheme. "This is a setup," Kingsley exploded, rising abruptly. "Gabriel is trying to defame me to justify this ridiculous story about his supposed daughter." "The story isn't ridiculous, Kingsley," Gabriel replied calmly. "And you know that better than anyone. After all, it was you who ensured Sandra was left at that orphanage in New York." A heavy silence fell over the room. The board members exchanged tense glances, and Kingsley struggled to maintain control. At the abandoned country house, Sandra walked through the dusty rooms, her flashlight illuminating covered furniture and paintings on the walls. In Flora's old room, she found an antique desk with a false drawer. Inside, there was a diary, different from the one they had found earlier, along with a series of photographs and a sealed envelope addressed to Gabriel. The pages of the diary revealed Flora's growing anguish as she uncovered her brother's manipulations. She had gathered enough evidence to expose Kingsley's scheme, but feared for her safety and that of her unborn child. The last entry, dated the day of her disappearance, contained a shocking revelation. Kingsley had threatened to expose old family secrets that could destroy not only the company but the Nark family's reputation. Sandra photographed each page with her cell phone and immediately sent them to Gabriel. These revelations could be decisive for the outcome of the board meeting. Meanwhile, in the envelope addressed to Gabriel, there was a letter that would change everything. Flora not only revealed Kingsley's plan, but also left specific instructions on how to protect her daughter and the company. As the sun began to set, Sandra found the final and most important piece of evidence, documents hidden inside a hollow book. These provided definitive proof of Kingsley's manipulation and the true reason behind Flora's disappearance. With trembling hands, Sandra picked up her phone and called Gabriel. The truth was now complete, and nothing could stop it. As night fell over Millbrook, Sandra hurriedly entered the Nark Technology building. Her heart raced with the discoveries from the country house weighing heavily on her. The receptionist, recognizing her, quickly waved her to the executive elevator. "The board meeting is still happening, miss," she informed her. "Your father asked for you to come up as soon as you arrived." When Sandra reached the 25th floor, the air was thick with tension. She could hear raised voices coming from the meeting room. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to a chaotic scene. Kingsley was standing, his face red with anger, pointing accusingly at Gabriel. The board members were divided, some shocked, others confused. "So the lost daughter finally appears," Kingsley mocked upon seeing Sandra. "Come to watch the destruction of the company your mother loved so much?" Gabriel stood, extending his hand to Sandra. "Daughter, did you find something?" Sandra nodded, her voice firm despite her nerves. "I found everything, Dad. The truth about what happened to Mom, and about what Uncle Kingsley did." She began to spread the documents across the meeting table: fraudulent contracts, records of illegal bank transfers, and Flora's diary. The board members leaned in, examining the evidence with growing astonishment. "This is a fraud," Kingsley shouted, trying to grab the papers. Gabriel stopped him, holding his arm firmly. "Enough lies, Kingsley," Gabriel said, his voice heavy with 2 decades of pent-up pain. "It's time for the truth." Sandra then revealed the contents of Flora's letter and the last entries in the diary. The room fell into stunned silence as the story unfolded. Flora had discovered not only Kingsley's fraudulent activities, but also a darker secret. Kingsley wasn't really her brother. He had been illegally adopted by the Nark family as a child, a favor to an influential family that wanted to rid themselves of an unwanted son. This secret, if revealed, could threaten not just the company but the entire family's reputation. When Flora confronted Kingsley with this knowledge, he panicked. Fearing the loss of everything, Kingsley devised a plan to silence her. However, Kingsley lacked the courage to harm his sister physically. Instead, he forced her into disappearance, threatening to expose the adoption secret that would ruin the family's reputation. Flora, pregnant and fearing for the life of her unborn child, agreed to step away. Kingsley arranged for her to assume a new identity in a distant city with the promise that one day she could return, but that day never came. Flora tragically died in a car accident years later, far from her family and without ever knowing her daughter. As Sandra recounted the story, silent tears ran down Gabriel's face. Kingsley, who had collapsed into a chair, appeared to have lost all his arrogance. "Why, Kingsley?" Gabriel asked, his voice choked. "Why maintain this lie for so long?" Kingsley raised his eyes, defeated. "At first it was fear. Then it was greed. I had already gone too far to turn back." The board members exchanged shocked and disbelieving looks. One of the older members stood up. "Mr. Nark, Miss Sandra, on behalf of the board, I apologize for not having noticed what was happening. We will take all necessary measures to correct this situation." In the days that followed, significant changes took place at Nark Technology. Kingsley was removed from his duties, and the authorities were notified about the frauds. Gabriel, with the support of the board, initiated a broad restructuring of the company. Sandra, now officially recognized as the heir, took an active role in the business, bringing new ideas and a fresh vision. She also dedicated herself to honoring her mother's memory by creating a foundation in Flora's name to help orphan children. On a sunny afternoon, weeks after the revelations, Gabriel and Sandra visited the cemetery where Flora had been buried under a false name. With the help of the authorities, they managed to transfer the body to Millbrook. In front of the new grave, father and daughter remained silent, their hands intertwined. The mystery had been solved, the truth revealed. Although the past couldn't be changed, the future opened before them, full of possibilities. "She would be proud of you," Gabriel said softly, looking at Sandra. Sandra smiled through her tears. "Of both of us, Dad. She would be proud of both of us." As they left the cemetery, the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. It was a new beginning for the Narks, a chance to honor Flora's legacy and build a future based on truth and love that united them. In the months that followed, Sandra and Gabriel worked tirelessly to rebuild not only the company, but also their relationship. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, as if making up for lost time. Narc technology underwent a significant transformation under their joint leadership. Gabriel's experience, combined with Sandra's fresh perspective and innovative ideas, led the company to new heights. They implemented ethical business practices and focused on developing technologies that could positively impact society. Sandra took a special interest in the company's charitable arm, expanding it into the Flora Narc Foundation. The foundation focused on supporting orphanages and programs for underprivileged children, ensuring no child would have to go through what Sandra had experienced. As for Kingsley, he faced the consequences of his actions. After a highly publicized trial, he was sentenced to prison for fraud and embezzlement. The revelation of his true origins caused a stir in Millbrook's high society, but the Narcs chose to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on past deceptions. 1 year after the revelations, on a crisp autumn day, much like the one when Sandra had first stepped into Gabriel's office, father and daughter stood in Flora's beloved orchid garden. The flowers were in full bloom, their delicate petals a testament to the care and attention they had received. "You know," Sandra said gently, touching an orchid, "I always felt a connection to these flowers, even before I knew about Mom. It's like a part of her was always with me." Gabriel nodded, his eyes misty with emotion. "Flora always said that orchids were like people, unique, requiring patience and understanding to thrive. She would be amazed to see how you've made this garden flourish." As they walked through the garden, they discussed plans for the future. Sandra had been working on a new project, a tech initiative to connect orphan children with potential adoptive families, using advanced matching algorithms and virtual reality to bridge distances and create connections. "I think this could really make a difference," Sandra explained enthusiastically. "If we can help even a fraction of the children out there find loving homes, it would be worth every effort." Gabriel listened with pride, recognizing in Sandra the same passion and determination that had driven Flora. "Your mother would have loved this idea," he said. "In fact, I think I remember her mentioning something similar once, long ago. She always wanted to use our resources to help others." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Gabriel pulled out a small box from his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this," he said, handing it to Sandra. Inside the box was a delicate silver locket. When Sandra opened the locket, she found a tiny photograph of Flora on one side and on the other, an inscription, "To my darling daughter, may you always bloom where you are planted." Tears welled up in Sandra's eyes as she clutched the locket. "She had this made for me," Gabriel said softly. He nodded. "She commissioned it just before she disappeared. I found it in her things but could never bring myself to open it until now. I think she'd want you to have it." As Sandra fastened the locket around her neck, a sense of completion washed over her. The missing piece of her life's puzzle had finally fallen into place. She was no longer just Sandra, the orphan from New York, but Sandra Narc, daughter of Gabriel and Flora, heir to a legacy of love, innovation, and compassion. "Thank you, Dad," she said, embracing Gabriel, "for everything." As they walked back to the house, arm in arm, the last rays of sunlight caught the silver of Sandra's locket, making it shine. It was a beacon of hope, a symbol of a family reunited and a future bright with promise. In the years that followed, the Narc name became synonymous not only with technological innovation, but also with ethical business practices and philanthropic efforts. Sandra and Gabriel's story inspired many, reminding the world that it's never too late for second chances, and that the bonds of family can overcome even the greatest obstacles. The orchid garden remained a special place for both of them, a living memorial to Flora and a symbol of their own relationship, carefully nurtured, resilient, and forever blooming. As for the old Palazzo restaurant where their story began, it became a landmark in Millbrook. Locals would point it out to visitors, telling the tale of the millionaire who found his long-lost daughter. The table where Gabriel had first seen Sandra was marked with a small plaque, a reminder that sometimes fate has a way of bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. Sandra often found herself sitting at that very table, looking out at the rain-streaked windows, marveling at how a single moment could change the course of a life. She would touch her locket, feeling connected to both her past and her future, grateful for the twists of fate that had brought her home. And so, the story of the Narcs continued to unfold, each day bringing new challenges and triumphs. But no matter what life threw their way, Gabriel and Sandra faced it together. Their bond was strengthened by the truth they had uncovered and the love they shared. In Millbrook and beyond, their tale became a modern legend, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are those we thought we had lost forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories.